Everyone, this is Laura Poirot, and I am about to do a video on the conditions of imperial governance or national constitution or national government, and how each country has had a different constitution implemented based on 6 conditions, and then how that can tie into the standardization of these conditions to centralize an imperial governance rather than national governance, so the eradication of national government to form a centralized imperial global government of the empire. That's quite a mouthful, and it's a lot of information to absorb and to consider. So I've done a lot of research of late, and we've gone through from the federation or the federal constitutions, how the federation of these colonies actually created the British Empire since George V, so Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, and therefore King Charles is actually an emperor of this British Empire, and it includes the democracy and the self-governing constitutions that we have today. And that's the research lately that I've done. I've looked into the creations of these constitutions with Canada, US, Australia a bit further, so I can understand. I really wanted to understand. The whole crux of it was I was trying to figure out what made a republic still bound to the British Empire if there's no terminology used of a monarch or a monarchy, and that includes countries like France, India, and America, and Switzerland. So there was a definite I wanted to be able to distinguish what made it truly different, because as we know, constitutions change based on these 6 conditions necessary, or purely based on how liable the British king can be under this national governance. For example, you've got a lot of decades of and centuries possibly of complete disgust and hate and contempt towards the British monarchy with France, with India, and with America, based on differing reasons. And so they were very good reasons to form these republics. And I'll get into, I've done quite a lot. You can see here I found a thing saying about the British Empire is at the commencement of this century, the greatest empire which the world has known. The Roman and Holy Roman Empires in their prime never equaled it. More than 400 millions in Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and America bear allegiance to George V. Should not this, the greatest of empires, be entitled to an emperor? There was at one time the Roman emperor. Why not today have the British emperor? So that was really what I started with, and then I've moved forward to looking into the sub-constitutions of these colonies, how initially America was based on a charter, a a charter like in Virginia and Connecticut that dates back to Queen Elizabeth and King James I, and then King Charles, the other King Charles. So it's been interesting. It's also been interesting to discover the reasons why, in essence, what exactly changed within the US Constitution when there was a revolution. And in essence, they were fine with the allegiance to the crown, but they didn't want to be internally governed by the crown per se. They didn't mind to be externally governed by the crown or the empire. So there was still an allegiance to the crown. So commerce and foreign policy governed by the crown, that was still a given. But taxation, because that's really what started the revolution, was the stamp duty or the stamp tax. The taxation and internal policy was not to be governed by the crown directly, which, at this point with Heritage Foundation, with all these think tanks and institutions, there has been an infiltration, and you're taxed. Americans are taxed. So really, it's interesting that no one has actually spotted or identified that the agreement that was under the revolution is no longer. But that was a really interesting discovery as well, and we'll get to that in a different video. But because I've got so much built up now, I need to produce a video about one of these topics. So this was about, we've even talked about the subject races of Africa and their government. So we're talking about the original land owners of each colony, and then what they were subjugated to for the sake of imperial unity and standardization. These are not my words. These are words of the empire. I think this was in, I can't remember this book, if it was 1912 or if this was in the 1800s. I'm not too sure. But yeah, you've got all this information here. Yes, there's that event in history. And just an understanding that the Imperial Federal Constitutional Union of Colonial Nations was the first step towards an imperial global constitution. So the federation, or any federal constitution, it was and is the first step of internationalization of the British Empire, of global centralization, central control. Alrighty, so we're up to this point, and I'm going to open up the Twitter post because it's a little more, it breaks it down a little bit more, and it's more in my language, because a lot of this was a part of the research I did, and I had yet to really filter what was truth and what wasn't, because there's a lot of re-narration and re-education of history stating that there were certain natural conditions of a nation as to the need to progress or to develop and evolutionize, when really it was just forced conquests by Britain. And then they're like, oh yeah, but the country's much better now because we've developed it, we've helped it flourish, because every time there was a conquest, free trade was the exchange, or was really what was going to happen no matter what. And that was the point of the conquest as well, is that they wanted to create more open trade. So the imperial governance of a nation is shaped by various conditions, and there are 6 conditions, and we're going to speak about one, but these are the 6. Geographical situation, climate, population, religion, education, and the character of its people. These factors influence the structure, systems, control, and limited freedoms by socialist democracy. And I say limited freedoms because without the subjugation of the nation, the subjugation of the original landowners, complete and utter control, the building of cities, there had to be a central control and a central element to enforcing control once the colony was taken over. Without that subjugation, you cannot have, and you were not then provided freedoms like all of the gains of wealth or debt, depending on how you look at it, wealth and trade that the colonization afforded you, that the imperial governance afforded you as a subject of Britain. So we're talking today about the geographical situation, the first condition of what makes up which constitution would be chosen to govern a colony or nation. They don't say colony anymore, so let's just say a nation. And really, in essence, you can then apply all of these conditions to what it takes to standardize the world, the multiple countries, in order to have imperial governance. Nations on coastlines or near trade routes are given robust economies and democratic institutions due to increased commerce and cultural exchange. Landlocked or isolated countries experience limited economic opportunities and centralized governance. How much you take of this as true based on what the empire sells to you as a natural given or condition of a country, just like economics, just like many things that you're told are natural, which are just completely by design and artificial. You can either take this as a natural condition, or you can take it as a condition that that's been revised or created and designed to make it look natural by the empire. The Greeks believed that the geographical location of a newly settled town or colony significantly influenced its governance. A town on a fine harbour with productive lands behind was likely to develop a democratic government due to the influence of the commercial class. Conversely, an interior town might be kept from the predominance of democracy. This strategic positioning was often a motive for planting a colony in such a location. The Greeks understood that geography could shape the political landscape of their settlements. I find it interesting how economics is deeply tied and interrelated with politics, because this is all about when the empire overrules and overtakes, about trade. These considerations reflect the Greeks' recognition of the interplay between geography and governance. By carefully selecting settlement sites, they aimed to influence the political structures that would emerge in their colonies. Climate significantly influences the development of political systems. Harsh climates limit agricultural productivity, leading to centralized governance to manage scarce resources. Temperate climates support more egalitarian societies with decentralized power structures. The reason why I also bring this up is also to apply this. I want you to think bigger picture while I'm talking to you about this, because of what's happening for Agenda 2030, what's happening currently with weather controls, what's happening with the weather events, what's happening with fake climate scam, what's happening with blended finance and the new green imperialism and the digital economy that will trap us with credit scores, ESG credit scores, and ensure that we are governed by environment. That is exactly what they're saying. They're saying this is, this is long before this was ever the plan. They are saying that, and they are aware that harsh climates that limit agricultural productivity, which seems to be by design at this point, leads to centralized governance to manage scarce resources. That will definitely be the intent, or is the intent of climate events by weather controls. It's to centralize governance. And the reason why I put this little clip up is due to arable land or agricultural productivity, because China has very, very little agricultural arable land because it's so mountainous. So surprisingly, it's a very big issue due to the population numbers. It's a very, very big issue. And it ties into the way it's been constitutionally governed at this point. The same with, well, yeah, I won't even get into Russia at this point. Okay. Tropical climates, political capacity is often limited. In tropical climates, political capacity is often limited, with many regions exhibiting despotic states and minimal political activity. The intense heat throughout the year can stifle the free spirit and hinder the development of democratic institutions. Even when civilizing and elevating influences are introduced from abroad, they tend to flourish temporarily before the local population deteriorates to the level of the surrounding conditions. This pattern has been observed in various tropical regions under colonial rule. Sure, it has. This image is a surrender of the island of Mauritius to the British in 1810. So you'll see a lot of hypocrisy in the images that I provide. Intended. Examples: Dutch East Indies, British possessions like Natal, Jamaica and Mauritius, where the tropical climate posed challenges to the establishment and maintenance of democratic governance. The environment played a significant role in shaping the political landscape. Oh, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it wasn't about race. Secure from anything more serious than predatory raids from neighbours blessed with a benign climate, able at the expense of little labour to live in comparative comfort, Japan lay dormant until British conquest. I did add that in based on the research that I've done on Japan and obviously just true facts. Japan was completely insulated until it was surrounded by the British, Dutch, Russian Navy, and American. I'm sure there was Russian involved. where they found themselves called upon either to defend their possessions by force of arms or to become a subject race. This need developed their character, and out of this grew the greatness of national life, which promises to carry them far. I think this book was just done straight after, probably no, I'm not too sure. Late 1800s was when the shogunate was taken over by imperialism, Japanese imperialism, after the British conquest. So you can see that here. It was not until the Romans had secured for themselves a seaboard that their career as an imperial people started, and that career dwindled when the sea was abandoned by the Romans themselves. Britain has learned a lot from Rome and Roman Empire. That is why their navy was so strong. Hence the trident. In the case of Rome, the geographical condition of a seaboard was achieved by themselves. The sea did not play the important part upon the character of the people that it did in the cases of Venice, Holland, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain. In each of these countries, it was responsible for bringing into existence a hardy, self-reliant people. Venice, created from out of the sea, stamped her people's character with the restless temper of the ocean, difficult of control. Their constitution was evidence of this. France, on the other hand, whilst possessing a seaboard, was doubly blessed with a richly arable hinterland. Her people were neither driven to the sea to find sustenance nor to defend her shores, enjoying a climate more mild than that of England or Holland. Her people were not called upon for the same exertion to provide a living. They were therefore physically less hardy, more attached to the soil from which they drew sustenance, and less inclined to roam far afield. Sure they were. To them, the only wealth was from the land and competition, its possession. The hereditary landlord, the aristocrat, and royalty itself were regarded with fear, then with hatred, by the peasant whose sphere of enterprise was restricted by the vast holdings of a minority. Hilarious, given the takeover of land and the land ownership that's now part of United Nations World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030, imperial restructure, and Macron being a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, being a complete and utter plant. I mean, it's tragic. It's surely tragic. And you can see that this is going against the consideration of each national condition, because these conditions no longer apply. It is about the standardization and bastardization of each of our nations, the eradication of our national sovereignty to comply to central global new order. The germ of socialistic democracy, never allowed to live in England or Holland through its natural enemy, sea power, was ever present in France, or France, depending on how you say. But owing to the successive wars with her neighbours, it was unable to spread, until with a long enough peace it triumphed. Really, the Republic was a way of keeping France in order. I'm very, very sure of it. Because after the defeat of Napoleon, France was restless and bitter and hateful towards Britain, and they wanted vengeance. I know that for a fact. I've read about it. I've read about it in many of these books and this history, these accounts of history by British. And so the Republic was a way to keep the order without making the monarchy or the monarch liable, or any monarchy or monarch liable. There is a pattern of federal republics of nations that hate the British Empire and monarchy and needed to withdraw monarchic terminology and a direct implication in its constitutions. Have you noticed, as I keep saying, India, America, and France? That 190-year event in India, far worse than anything you could ever possibly imagine. Ever. Over 165 million dead. 165 million people dead over 190 years. That is why India is a republic. That's why they had Asset Gandhi come in. Then you have America with the revolution, with the taxation, and them almost losing America, or the British almost losing America. It seems like as though the republic constitutions are a way of keeping colonies without losing them, without sacrificing them, by removing the direct implication and liability of the monarchy and monarch. Much like the Connecticut Order of 1662 did when America too was revolutionized, quote unquote, right up until the federal constitution replaced it, just retracted any king, monarch, or monarchy terminology. I digress. So that was under Charles II. And I can talk about the structure of the charter because the Constitution, the American Constitution, was actually based on that charter. It did change some things, but it was purely based on that charter, which is a part of a Greek league, or the first constitution where there was sovereignty of the people, where the tyrant that was ruling divested its power or its sovereignty to its people. That was the first real self-governing constitution there ever was. But there was still a ruler, and there is still a ruler in America, and there is still a ruler across the world. It's just under a self-governing nation and constitution whereby some rights are given locally, but the law stays British. The law stays under the crown. With all the requirements of a comfortable existence, the inhabitants of France were not called upon to seek a livelihood away from their land, but as the land became more closely occupied, the quality of thrift became a characteristic of the people. As I keep saying, I'm sure it did. I feel like these are responses, if not repercussions, consequences to being ruled and overruled. While this resulted in making France one of the wealthiest of nations, it has checked the production of children, with the result that today we find the population of France nearly stationary. And I've said in brackets, like Japan, the imperial cause of this situation about fertility in children and the production of children and their population was in fact a consequence, but that's not mentioned here. And that I have discussed that in one of my videos prior. I just can't remember which one it was. The importance of the geographical position in the career of a colony is illustrated in the case of Switzerland. I have mentioned in each of my country cases, national cases like Japan and France already. I have mentioned people that other friends of mine that I really, really enjoy their work or that follow me. Cut off from sea and surrounded by powerful neighbours with characteristics of a great people, yet unable to exercise them in national expansion. Yes. There are certain elements of Switzerland where everything has been created there. Maybe that is why they created that there, to create its own commerce of a different kind, its own governance, own commerce of a different kind, with the with Vienna, with that little chit chat, and there's the WHO, there's the UN, there's BIS or Bank of International Settlements. That helped fund, finance World War II, German World War II. There's many of these institutions that have been put in place there, which goes hand in hand with this this environmental assessment. One of the earliest of European peoples to adopt constitutional government, which is funny because, European peoples, it adopted constitutional government, but this constitution was a replica of the American Constitution. Owing to their isolation and the continual danger of invasion from without, see Congress of Vienna. As I said, the Congress of Vienna changed everything I would call that an invasion, but it was all legal, all in agreement. This took the form of federal union. We have here one of the few democracies to be found. The geographical position precludes the acquisition of wealth either by the community or the individual. Hence, the adjunct of wealth, aristocratic rank is absent. Apologies, I'm going to say that again because my brain just lost it. The geographical position precludes the acquisition of wealth either by the community or the individual. Hence, the adjunct of wealth, aristocratic rank, is absent. This is the Protocol 1936, 30th of July, Protocol regarding the immunities of Bank of International Settlements. The duly authorised representatives of the government of His Majesty the King of the Belgians, the government of the United Kingdom of Britain and Northern Ireland, the government of Canada, the government of the Commonwealth of Australia, the government of New Zealand, the government of the Union of South Africa, the government of India, the government of the French Republic, the government of His Majesty the King of Hellenes, the government of His Majesty the King of Italy, the government of His Majesty the Emperor of Japan, the government of It goes on. Originally, the dread of absorption or annexation by a more powerful neighbour drove the small, separate states or cantons into a federal union, which recognised state rights and independence in local control and established the sovereignty of the people. You want to see the sovereignty of the people? The Constitution is a replica of the ancient Achaean, I'll say Achaean, but that was the league I was talking about, the Greek league. Achaean League, American Constitution primarily. We see here, as we must have noted in the earlier stages of the Achaean Constitution, one great achievement possible under this form of government, the absence of internal strife. They are literally telling you in this work, in this historical account, they are telling you that the sovereignty, divesting the sovereignty of the king or tyrant or ruler to the sovereignty of the people, mitigates internal resistance and allows internal subjugation and control. This is one of the most important points there is to make. Were the federal union to be found among the component parts of an empire, a limited monarchy, an oh God, okay, hold on, let me start again. Where the federal union can be found among the component parts of an empire, a limited monarchy, an aristocratic democracy, or a republic, it has the inestimable advantage of eradicating internal strife by the abolition of the causes, like in India, America, and France. So what they're saying is they customize and personalize the Constitution according to the conditions of the takeover, according to the conditions of the relations between Britain and the nation that is being colonized or governed by their laws. So this is what's interesting, is we're either here talking about 6 natural conditions of these nations and then how they're basing it. They're basing the Constitution on these 6 conditions, or we're basing it on the relations at the time between Britain and that country. That's the pickle we're in. So you can look at it either way or both ways and see how you feel, see what you come up with. The geographics of Switzerland has produced effects like those found in Holland, Great Britain, and Scandinavia. The rigour of the climate, limited arability of the land, its mountainous character have produced a hardy and independent race whose character is reflected in their form of government. Like Davos World Economic Forum. Hardy. There's been many, many shifts, sadly, within national sovereignty. This is what Switzerland used to be like. This is Switzerland now. Sad but true. The geographical position of a country determines the system of its government, first by being primarily responsible for molding molding is a very important word, the character of its people, and secondly, by the country's position with regard to neighbours. Definitely to neighbours. I'm guessing to neighbours is Britain and the British Empire. You can see here that they've really considered nowadays the consideration of the character of the American people and its position with regard to its neighbours. He definitely just looks completely synchronized, don't you think? How does an empire standardize a country's position these days and character and governance with geographical mapping, or the geographical positioning of each nation, moulding the geography to mould its character. Data mapping for centralised resource allocation and monitoring. Smart, sustainable cities, purely based on privatisation of land and natural resources. Digitalised economy and governance. I haven't put in there climate or weather controls. That's another one. Many ways to standardise a country. The natural environment looks untouched. That's interesting. Gradual industrial collapse of divestment away from geographically strong nations like the Western nations to ones intentionally underdeveloped, developing and unstable, that are completely controlled and profit driven, like China, like BRICS. 1973 UN Pact, Henry Kissinger. Important to note. We have finished the discussion on the first condition of imperial governance of a nation, nay empire, geographical situation. We have 5 more to go. Thanks for staying with me. I really appreciate it. I hope this is of some value to you. And I apologize for me not being able to pronounce certain words in the process. Thanks, guys.